One, two, three.
So right now, working through some lighting changes, as you can see, trying to make the video look good, as well as going to break in some editing software. So I wanted to make a simpler video for this week. I'm just going to talk about some favorite watches from June. Hopefully some people can get some recommendations out of that, some things to watch for the upcoming month. One of the main things I was working on this month, in terms of watching stuff, was making a top 10 of 1963 list. So I watched a lot for that, and I will be making a video on that at some point, but I won't be highlighting those watches because those will obviously be coming up in another video. So this is just going to be some favorites, not from 1963. So the first one I wanted to highlight was About Dry Grasses. This is a Turkish film. About Dry Grasses is directed by, I think I've got this right, Nuri Bilge Ceylan. About Dry Grasses is about a young art teacher who hopes to be transferred to Istanbul after completing his mandatory duty in a remote village in Anatolia. It's long, it's almost entirely talking, and it's riveting. I am kind of hit or miss sometimes on long movies. Attention span stuff, I'm not great in that department, so sometimes I really struggle to connect with something for that long consecutively, but something like this, or also An Elephant Sitting Still, I think are some notable long movies that have stuck with me. And yeah, this one is just brilliant, really. It has one of the best dinner scenes I've seen in a movie. Just an extended discussion between two characters, kind of discussing their contrasts and their worldviews. It's just, shot, reverse shot. It's just characters talking. And again, it's absolutely riveting. It's fantastic. It's really wonderful character work. And it's just amazing how impactful the written word can be. Just as simple as a good script. Now, granted, that's not the only thing the film has going for it, but the primary driver is just simply talking. And it's so powerful. It sets up such a compelling character in a unique way. Perhaps morally gray, perhaps just kind of unlikable, yet somewhat understandable. Just a great mix of compelling and also repulsive character traits for this guy. He's kind of a conduit for questions overall, because there is a decent amount of philosophizing, either from him or from other people, and kind of examining the way he views the world, examining the way he interacts with something like the education system primarily, and through the lens of a regular, flawed human being, raising questions, raising issues. He additionally deals with things like bitterness in his life and the fact that he is such a mixed bag in a certain sense in terms of likability, I think is perfect in this context, because it could be easy, I think, for a pure, lawful good character in this scenario despair against, the face of wrongdoing or whatever, in the world. But something about this mixed likability character, I think, just makes the questions that much more interesting, because that they're part of the problem in a certain sense too. It feels very much more like the human race self-examining. I think there's also a good case to make this a rewatch movie, because it feels like a lot of the technical work, a lot of the shots are very intentional. Wider, longer takes in some spots, sometimes static shots covering a whole conversation. Sometimes it's head-on shots capturing the intensity of a conversation. Sometimes it's a certain following shot that I really love as an introduction for a character. There is one particularly fascinating scene that you'll know when you get to it, if you watch the film, that I think is kind of fascinating for... I don't want to describe it anymore. I'm not going to get into spoilers in this video. There's not a whole ton to spoil anyway, but this is the kind of movie you just settle in, let the conversations and the way characters interact wash over you. And I think it'll leave you with plenty to think about in terms of the way it executes. Next, I'll talk about Ghostlight for a bit. This is a release from this year. I believe it screened initially at Sundance, but I didn't get a chance to watch it then, so had to wait a few months to watch it in theaters. Ghostlight is about when a construction worker unexpectedly joins a local theater's production of Romeo and Juliet alongside his estranged teenage daughter. The drama on stage starts to mirror his own life. I think this film has an extremely well incorporated metaphorical device. The play Romeo and Juliet, as the description said. I won't get into it too much because I don't want to spoil anything in this video, but I think there could be a temptation. There was a temptation certainly by me partway through to think that everything is a little bit too on the nose and that it's almost doing things a little bit too closely. I'll just say I think that turns out to be a strength rather than a weakness. I think the literal quality helps out the film a lot. This film perhaps is about really it's about an older man, this dad, who kind of struggles to express himself. He does emphasize a couple times throughout the film that he's old school. He struggles to confront his emotions on some subjects and kind of faces consequences for it because, you know, even if you try to press your emotions down for a while, you can't do it forever. They eventually show out some way or another. And so he's kind of learning to work with that, work through that. And in the meantime, you know, he's got a relationship with his family, still together with his wife, has the one kid. There is well, I won't say what, but there is some kind of tragic event in the film, which is the source of him, you know, having this emotion to be managed, basically. And that eventually leads him to joining the theater company. This kind of works as, I wouldn't say a substitute for therapy, because I was kind of thinking through the film, like, is this accidentally anti-therapy in a certain sense? But I don't think that ever truly becomes an issue. I think the film understands that there's uniqueness in people, that even in order, right, to heal, you can't necessarily just jump straight to being healed by something. You may have to even bridge a gap to start the healing process to begin with. And this film ultimately is about finding that bridge and learning how to start dealing with things, I think. The lead actor, Keith Kupferer, is quite good. The film's technical side, I think, is fine. It looks a little bit delicate, which it probably should. I think there are some moments like the stage during the production that looks quite nice. I think that's probably the best looking part of the film. I don't know if all characters are used that well. I don't know if all character arcs work out that great. But I will say the film definitely succeeds in its purpose, I think. And like I said, the usage of the play is really wonderful. And this might not end up on my 2024 list at the end of the year. Probably won't if it's a very good year. But regardless, I would recommend it. It's probably out of theaters by now, but hopefully it shows up on a streaming service somewhere so that people can get a look at it, because this film is well worth watching. Next, I'll talk about The Empty Man. After a group of teens from a small Midwestern town begin to mysteriously disappear, the locals believe it is the work of an urban legend known as the Empty Man. As a retired cop investigates and struggles to make sense of the stories, he discovers a horrific secret that puts his life and the lives of those close to him in grave danger. This, by now, is becoming kind of an infamous distribution story, because I think it was 20th Century Fox kind of just dumped this unceremoniously. I've never actually seen the trailer, but as I recall, it's a little bit misleading, given the name that sounds like, you know, Slender Man or something that could be fairly generic, or, you know, the Midnight Man or something like that, Bye Bye Man. It sounds like it belongs in that family of movies. But this is actually directed by David Pryor, who, before this, I believe had just made 1200 AM, or AM 1200, whichever the order is, which is one of my favorite horror short films. I love that thing. And after this, he went on to direct The Autopsy, I think, from Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. But this is his fairly long feature film debut. I have certainly heard people criticizing it for being a little bit messy, trying to do too much. And it does have a few different genres it tries to cover. It's kind of, you could call it noir, as much as a pain of a word that is to say, noir horror. And I kind of love the combined feel of it personally. I love the little bit of detective investigation. David Pryor worked with, David Fincher. Worked with David Fincher. I believe he might have made some like documentaries and things like that for some of his work. And I think you can kind of tell, because of a certain amount of precision, and also it may just be after the fact, associating it with something like, you know, Seven or Zodiac, whatever, some of David Fincher's own crime stories. But I love this movie because of the ambition. I also love the movie because of some of the horror elements and the actual execution. But I also love the ambition. It tries to fit in a lot of ideas to maybe mixed success, certainly some success. It, like I said, tries to cover a lot of ground and genres. And I think the investigation works well. I think it has a couple of really fantastic horror scenes as well, like the one around the fire is certainly one of my favorites from recent memory. I'm certainly not the only person praising this film now a few years after its release, or even a couple years after its release. It certainly gained a bit of a following, despite the poor start to life that it got. But nonetheless, if you're at all a fan of horror, investigation stuff, I would recommend this a lot. Some people, I think, would say that it peaks in Act 1 with its introduction, that it would make a great short horror film on its own with none of the rest of the film. That may or may not be true. I kind of think the peak of the film is after that, but the opening is quite good in a self-contained sort of way. So I think this is well worth checking out. I respect the ambition, and I hope, more people continue to do so. Next is a slightly similar kind of movie. It's actually Black Mountain Side, which doesn't have a lot of views, at least on Letterboxd, probably not that much attention overall, but I am a sucker for mysterious supernatural horror that might even possibly be good. So Black Mountain Side is an easy pick for me. And in a sense, I think you get more than you bargain for, or more than you expect, with a movie like Black Mountain Side. I would say I don't necessarily think every movie could be a 100. Not every movie does a lot of great things. Like, in my mind, when I watch a movie, it kind of starts out like a 50, like whatever. It's in the middle. And then the movie does things that, I think make it better or make it worse as you go on, The good things sometimes add up, whatever. Sometimes they're outweighed by bad stuff. Sometimes the movie just doesn't do that much that registers as either good or bad to me. So, theoretically, if a movie was a 50, it could either be all over the place, lots of good, lots of bad, or maybe it's just very generic, whatever. So if a movie doesn't do a lot of good things, then to me, it could just never be a 100, even if it made 0 missteps. This is a movie, I think, that if it did all of the good things it does and none of the bad things, it could be a 100. And I say that because I'm very impressed by the direction. It's extremely intentional. The way it uses some of the longer takes and the way they're blocked out, the fact that they don't have to rely on quick cutting, hiding things that they didn't plan for, right? Like, this seems like a very intentional, well-planned film with a clear vision in mind and some great ideas. It is not a 100 because I think it does make some missteps, and some of the ideas, well-intentioned as they may be, don't necessarily work out, but I absolutely love the style. I love the way it uses the long takes, sometimes to fake you out a little bit, sometimes to actually make a point. It uses some extremely wide shots in a couple of cases for a unique perspective on some things. Yeah, I don't know. It's perhaps hard to describe if you don't watch it, but I just respect so much the specific and detailed vision this director had in mind for something that could easily have just been, and I guess technically is, kind of just DVD, Walmart bin fare. I think this movie just deserves better than this. I would recommend this a lot. It's sort of Lovecraftian, sort of supernatural. There's archaeology in it if you're into that. It's horror-ish. I think the movie that it would love to be the most is The Thing. You can certainly see, at least I can certainly see, the influence of that film all over this movie. And that's not a bad thing. I'm certainly glad it aspires so high. I wish it could get all the way there, but I love it. I love it despite its imperfections. Then the last movie I'll talk about is Sweet Smell of Success. This is a 1957 film, and it's about New York City newspaper writer J.J. Hunsaker, who holds considerable sway over public opinion with his Broadway column. But the one thing he can't control is his younger sister, Susan, who is in a relationship with aspiring jazz guitarist Steve Dallas. Hunsaker strongly disapproves of the romance and recruits publicist Sidney Falco to find a way to split the couple, no matter how ruthless the method. Despite the description being primarily about JJ, it really is about Sidney Falco and his pursuit of a specific brand of success. Specifically, what sticks out to me in this movie the most is the effect that good writing can have when your protagonists are unlikable. Because these two dudes are pretty despicable, all things considered. Even only a couple things considered, really. There's some absolutely inhuman behavior from both of them, primarily Sidney, who is thirsting after success so hard. Yet at the same time, it's not a chore to follow them around. This is one of the best scripts I think I've watched in a film that does wonders for giving you something to hold on to when the characters are just reprehensible. The fact is that almost always you need something to stick with through a movie, right? You could take more than one for sure. That'd be great. And I think there is more than one in this film too. But the main one by far is the quips, the brutality of some of the lines, the lightning pace at which people talk and move and make, deals and not deals probably the wrong word, but people negotiate and people try to navigate their relationships mid sentence. And the quality of writing gives you something to appreciate without kind of having to appreciate these people. You follow them around, you like the writing, you love the exchanges. It does not hide what the characters do. In a way, it actually accentuates it. It almost adds a certain shock value in some cases. And you just love it because the writing is top notch. The main characters would be the easiest thing to hang on to, right? Because you're following them around all the time. But we don't have that because they're terrible. We have writing, and that's all we need. Another thing we have that's kind of interesting, although it's not as in your face, is the camera movement. It's very fluid. It's matching the energy of the dialogue. And especially for 1957, cameras moved, of course, but this feels extremely fluid for the time. And it's a perfect match for the dialogue, for the verbal sparring, for the barbs. And you just get like this machine following this machine in Sidney Falco that's just searching for success. He is following his prime directive to his wit's end. And the film is just like churning out these moments and these conflicts and these chances for Sidney to further himself, to create and avoid conflicts. This movie is a machine, and it's a joy to watch. And I recommend this so much. One of my favorite movies from the 50s. And I think this is a great entry point for some people into watching older films. Because I think a common problem people have with older movies is some of the pace, some of the way people move around, like some of the blocking, right? The older you get in film, it starts to look more and more like a stage play, to me at least. But this movie feels like it could be made now. It's a timeless idea, and the script is timeless, and I think more people should watch it. But that's all the movies that I will highlight for this month, and probably the next video I make will be film movements, so look forward to that, and I'll see you there.